So it's a special privilege to introduce our keynote speaker. 2 years ago this month, Reuters selected Alessandra Galloni as its editor-in-chief, the first woman to lead that global news organization in its 170-year history. Alessandra began her career in Rome, where she was born, and joined Reuters on its Italian language service after a brief stint with AP there. She left for the Wall Street Journal, where she worked for 13 years as a reporter and editor in London, Paris, and Rome. She returned to Reuters a decade ago as editor of the Southern Europe Bureau before becoming global managing editor 2 years later. She has said that she wanted to be a journalist as long as she can remember, and in fact, got her first taste of the profession by working on her middle school newspaper. Among her many accolades, we are proud to note, is an OPC Award 20 years ago tonight, in fact. She and two colleagues from the Wall Street Journal won the Malcolm Forbes Award for their coverage of the fall of the giant Italian dairy company Parmalat, which at the time was one of Europe's biggest corporate success stories. The Journal team exposed the details of a massive and amazingly crude fraud that included the disappearance of billions of euros from Parmalat's books. Today, she leads a world-class news organization, one of the world's largest, with 2,500 journalists in 200 locations. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Alessandra Galloni.
Thank you. Thank you to the Overseas Press Club for inviting me to speak this evening. And a huge congratulations to all the winners and all the citation recipients. Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the brutality faced by the Ukrainian population, the repression of human rights and information, the geopolitical factions emerging from the conflict, rightly loom large over tonight's prizes. Journalists are putting their lives, their health, their freedom at risk to gather facts on the ground in order to inform the world. At least 8 journalists have been killed covering the war in Ukraine over the past 15 months, according to Reporters Without Borders. Wall Street Journal journalist Evan Gershkovich has been jailed for 4 weeks in a Moscow prison on charges of espionage. And 3 other journalists have been jailed in Russia since the start of the war, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. I'm looking for where the journal table is behind me. To my former colleagues at the Wall Street Journal, I know what a close-knit family you are and how you are all so committed and united in getting Evan out, and we all stand with you tonight and as long as he is in prison. I also want to thank the guardian angels behind the journalists, the security experts, the media lawyers, and all of the operations colleagues who work tirelessly for the security and the well-being of our reporters on the ground. On the battlefield and in the face of increasingly punitive governments and amid physical and virtual harassment against reporters, your work is indispensable. I'm looking at you, Catherine, and everyone else who is helping our journalists. As is clear from the winners tonight, despite the predominance of Ukraine in international reporting, you have all continued to shine your spotlight on other parts of the globe, on the victims and perpetrators of past and new conflicts, and on the oppressed in countries including Afghanistan, Haiti, Mexico, Venezuela, Saudi Arabia, and Nigeria, just to name a few of the coverage areas awarded this evening. I think you will all agree that it is our collective responsibility to remain in, to return to, and not to forget places and stories around the world, even when the media focus fades and when the headlines are no longer generating clicks. But tonight, I'd like to talk about another collective responsibility of ours, and that is to systematically and unwaveringly recognize, protect, and support all the local reporters on the front lines and behind the scenes in the countries that we cover. And we should do so not just because, of course, we stand alongside fellow journalists everywhere, but because covering the world cannot be done successfully with foreign correspondents alone. Last week, I was in Perugia, and during an event at the International Journalism Festival, I was asked by a young reporter in the audience, "Are foreign correspondents a thing of the past?" And I assured her that the world is still, thankfully, full of intrepid foreign correspondents. It is true, however, that tight resources have prompted many newsrooms to cut down on permanent representation of foreigners in many countries. Governments are routinely rejecting visa applications or expelling foreign journalists as a way to avoid scrutiny of elections, of public protests, of public policy failures, such as the handling of the COVID pandemic. Governments are resorting to espionage charges to turn foreign reporters into hostages, pawns of geopolitical disputes. Now, foreign correspondents covering countries clearly bring an important, fresh perspective. Foreign correspondents often are bolder or more naive, depending on your point of view. I remember many years ago, when I was covering my native country, my country, Italy, a certain ethics and standards editor, who many of you know and is sitting right in front of me, refused to publish a story of mine until I got serious and substantive comment from the Camorra, the Neapolitan mafia. Now, I assure you that this is not something that any Italian journalist would feel very comfortable doing. Let's just say I'm still waiting for that callback. Sorry, Alex. Seriously, foreign correspondents may not have the nuance and expertise of local journalists, which have institutional knowledge, language subtlety, cultural understanding. Globalization has forced greater levels of transparency around international news, and this means that there's greater pressure on us to deliver accurate, fair, and accountable news from everywhere. And not just in the capitals of the countries where we are headquartered. And so this means that more of us are employing local reporters across the countries that we cover. Also, as social media, as user-generated content have given us a direct view into events on the other side of the world, audiences are demanding more insight than the bird's-eye view of foreign correspondents. At the OPC, the number of local journalists being recognized alongside foreign correspondents has risen over the years. Today, as you've seen, Mitislav Chernov, Evgeny Maloletka, and Vasilia Stefanenko, three of the reporters, along with Lori Hinand, who won for erasing Mariupol, the brave and harrowing testimony of a city under siege. They're Ukrainian nationals. They're covering war in their own country, alongside their own families. Not only Jeremy Dupin, a Haitian national, is part of the Al Jazeera team that won for their work covering the lives of Haitians deported from the US. Simpa Sampson from Nigeria is part of the Bloomberg News team that received a citation for Black Snow, Nigeria's oil catastrophe. When journalists work in their own countries for foreign media, the risks are high. Local reporters do not have the cloak of protection offered by a foreign passport. Of the 363 journalists currently jailed around the world, this is the highest level in 30 years, according to CPJ. 354 are being held in their own countries. Many countries have resorted to trumped up charges, tax evasion, drug use, smuggling, hooliganism against their own. The list is long. Among them, Maria Ressa in the Philippines, Khadija Ismailova in Azerbaijan, Roman Protasevich in Belarus. More recently, there's Arton Prokhorov in Russia, who has been detained since last summer for allegedly extorting around $1,000 from a local businessman. Jose Ruben Zamora, president of the Guatemalan newspaper El Periódico, is in pretrial detention for alleged money laundering. Even without legal trouble, local journalists often face harsh attacks for their brave work in their public interest. Our late colleague, the photographer Danish Siddiqui, whom you recognized so beautifully here last year, spent months photographing the true toll of the COVID pandemic in his native India. Abroad, you knew him for his poignant, devastating images. In India, he faced government pushback, online trolling, and public criticism. In many instances, he was called a traitor. Because they often report on subjects that they wouldn't be able to tackle for their national media, local journalists are often not recognized for their work in bylines and in prizes. I wish I could tell you about all the tireless, brave work of so many journalists at Reuters, whose names we regularly keep off coverage, in countries including Nigeria, Venezuela, Egypt, Yemen, China, Russia. Think of Chinese colleagues in China and Vietnamese colleagues in Vietnam working for our news organizations. They can only be referred to as news assistants and cannot operate independently as journalists. When foreign journalists pack up because it's too dangerous to stay, they lose the story. When local reporters flee their own countries, they lose their homes, their livelihoods, their social ties, their culture. You will remember Wallon and Chassau, whom you also recognized here over the years, who spent more than 500 days in jail in Myanmar before they were released. I'm unable to return to my country, and many of my colleagues are in exile since the 2021 coup, Wallon said to me recently. Myanmar is a stark reminder of the importance of protecting freedom of the press. Think of Russian colleagues working for our news organizations and for Russian media. Many have fled their country since the beginning of the war, and it is unlikely that they will be able to return. For starters, their homes have likely been impounded for evading Russia's draft. The intensifying crackdown on press freedom the world over has created a new breed of exiles, journalists who dared report dangerous truths. For us at Reuters, reporters operating in their own countries are the heart of our operation. As a news agency, our responsibility, our obligation is to be on the ground, and we employ journalists of 90 nationalities and operate in 16 languages. We try not to have a foreign perspective, rather a global one. We don't operate a foreign desk, foreign to where. This approach forces us to have a deep, nuanced commitment to diversity among our people and in the voices of those we cover. Because diversity means something different for everyone in our newsroom. It also means that the potential to be a foreign correspondent should be available to everyone around the world. We believe that being at the source of news before, during, and after others fold their tents is an integral ingredient to remaining neutral. And this is true even in countries considered rogue or pariah by the international community. It is not easy, but the approach is based on the belief that if a voice, any voice, is silenced, the world is worse off. I was struck when I read Mytislav's first-person account of his 20 days in Mariupol under siege, which was part of the winning entry. He describes the effort by the Russian army to cut off all information. And he writes, "The absence of information in a blockade accomplishes two goals. Chaos is the first. People don't know what's going on and they panic. At first, I couldn't understand why Mariupol fell apart so quickly. Now I know it was because of the lack of communication. That's why we took such risks to be able to send the world what we saw. And that's what made Russia angry enough to hunt us down. I have never, ever felt that breaking the silence was so important. Thank you to all of those journalists who break the silence every day around the world. And thank you to all of you.